Morning, everybody. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a training from the Chicago Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. This is a training about disability and access. It's Friday, June 5th. My name is Ellen Wernicke, and let's go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, I am an accessible communication specialist at MOPD. I'm co-presenting with Liliana Schiller, who is our program manager for training. Liliana, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Like Ellen mentioned, I work for the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, and I'm the program manager of training, which means basically my job is this. So thank you for joining, and we hope you learned something today.
Great. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to give people an introduction to MOPD for those of you who aren't familiar with our department. We will define disability, talk about the legal definition and how we use it. We'll talk about some disability statistics and language, some best practices and categories of different disabilities and how they may affect how people access your business offerings, your programs, your services. And finally, we'll wrap it up in some takeaways that you can take with you. All right, we're going to start with a little introduction to MOPD. We are the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. We are the oldest and largest office of our kind in the nation, and we serve the people of Chicago, including people who live here and also people who visit. Our vision is to make Chicago the most accessible and inclusive city in the world. And our mission is to make sure that people with disabilities can participate fully in the life of the city and have equal opportunities to people without disabilities. We want to inspire positive change and make sure that the rights of our disability community are represented in the city and that people with disabilities who live here have every chance to do anything that they want to do, whether it's at work or at play. So it's a very large mandate, but we enjoy it. And some of our programs and services include our accessibility compliance unit, which works with buildings in the city and making suggestions for accessibility updates. We have a career center, which serves people with disabilities who can come in for free, get their resume looked at, practice interviews, and work with equitable accommodations for their future jobs or careers. Our communication access team, sorry if you hear the L going past, that's just for authenticity's sake. I do live right by the L. So our communication access team provides ASL interpretation for city events, everything from a city council meeting to performances at the Taste of Chicago, where folks in the audience may need ASL to understand what's going on stage. Our disability resource unit recommends provides referrals to disability services for folks. We have a program specifically for disabled survivors of gun and community violence, which is a specialized category whose needs may be different from the overall disability community. Our home mod program helps people fix up their homes, whether it's a house or an apartment, and accessibility updates need to be made so they can keep living there. Our substance use prevention program goes into schools around the city to talk to deaf and hard of hearing students about making good choices, resisting peer pressure, and avoiding alcohol and drugs. And finally, our training program includes presentations like the one you're listening to right now or watching right now. We go through to different companies in the city, different city programs. Almost anybody who will have us, we try to accommodate in our trainings because we want to make sure that everybody has the knowledge to serve people with disability and, feel confident and proud of, being able to meet their needs. All right. Let's talk about the ADA and kind of the legal definition of disability. The ADA, as you probably know, is the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. This became law thanks to grassroots activism, community organizers, and bipartisan support. Activists worked for decades to get these disability rights codified into law. There are five titles of the ADA having to do with employment, State and local government, that's us at MOPD. Public accommodations, that can be in a business or in a public building like City Hall, for example. Telecommunications, and a miscellaneous category for other items that don't fit into the others. There is a long and rich history of disability activism in this country. We don't have time to go through all of it, but we did want to highlight some of the protests around the passage of the ADA, including one called the Capitol Crawl. If you haven't heard about this, we're going to watch a very short video that will hopefully illuminate you and teach you some things about our history.
It's a really sweet image of a mother congratulating her daughter. That's 8-year-old Jennifer Keelan and her mom, Cindy. But to really get what Jennifer just accomplished, let's look at another snapshot. There, that's Jennifer crawling up 83 steps on her hands and knees to the top of the U.S. Capitol. And here's what she had to say about it at the time.
I'll take all night if I have to. All right.
Jennifer was the young face of an organization called ADAPT, American Disabled for Accessible Public Transit, that was started in 1983 in Denver, Colorado. Today we take things like wheelchair access in public spaces for granted. But if you were disabled in 1983, you couldn't use the same facilities able-bodied people could. So ADAPT members started putting their bodies on the line to make a simple point. They just wanted to ride the bus. Its members excelled at the kind of punk protests that made headlines. They chained themselves to steering wheels and building entrances. They climbed inside Greyhound luggage compartments and under wheel wells so the buses couldn't move. And they got arrested. A lot. ADAPT replaced the public perception of disabled people as helpless and dependent with a new image of wheelchair warriors. Their protests got results. But ADAPT and other disability rights activists knew they needed to push for something even bigger. The ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, was a groundbreaking civil rights bill to prohibit discrimination and require reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. In 1988, after decades of work by ADAPT and other activists and lobbyists, the ADA was finally introduced in Congress. But the act got stalled in the House. That's when ADAPT decided to knock it loose. On March 12, 1990, ADAPT protesters led a march of more than 500 people down Pennsylvania Avenue in D.C. Jennifer, who had been diagnosed with cerebral palsy at age 2, was right there with them, marching all the way to the Capitol, where Congress was meeting to debate the ADA. And that's when ADAPT did what it did best: guerrilla civic action. At the foot of the Capitol, members dropped to the ground from their wheelchairs and started the climb up, backwards or on their hands and knees, whatever they could manage, step by painstaking step. They were determined to show the public in the most visceral way possible what it took for them to have access to the people's house like all other Americans. Just 4 months later, President Bush signed the ADA into law.
I now lift my pen to sign this Americans with Disability Act and say, let the shameful wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down.
The ADA was the life-changing civil rights act that ADAPT and other activists had worked toward for so long. It meant disabled Americans couldn't be denied access to housing, schools, jobs, and civic life any longer. And that's what the Capitol Crawl was for, so that all the other children who came after Jennifer would be able to ride, and so much more. To learn more, watch Change, Not Charity, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and like and subscribe for more from American Experience.
All right. I highly recommend that full documentary, by the way. It's on YouTube. It's about an hour long. It's very fascinating. Stories you may not have learned in history class. So anyway, let's go on to talk about defining disability by the ADA. Now, this is only one definition, and there can be lots of different definitions, but for legal reasons, it's important that we understand this one because this is the one that's the law. The Americans with Disabilities Act defines disability in 3 parts. One is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, including body or cognitive functions, movements, sensory functions or tasks. So anything you need to go about your day, to go to work, to go to school, that would fall under those categories. The second part of the definition is a history or record of such an impairment. So this could be something where you had a history of a condition such as cancer or a mental health condition or a chronic injury or traumatic brain injury, that you have recovered from it, but you still have some symptoms, or you possibly could have a recurrence or a relapse. Then you would also be considered as a person with a disability under this law. And the third category is a perception by others as having such an impairment. And disability has always been a social definition along with a legal definition. And the way we look at disability is always changing. One example that I like to cite here is that, maybe 50 or 60 years ago, if you tended to write with your left hand, that may have been considered a disability or something lesser than. Now we acknowledge and appreciate the left-handers among us. We don't tell people that they have to write with their right hand in order to be the same as everybody else. So that's one example of how the definition of disability is always changing. But someone could make an assumption about you as having a disability from something like a physical difference, like scars, or assuming that you have a mental health condition or some other condition. So that's, perception is always a part of how we talk about disability. As we mentioned, some disabilities can be temporary or acquired. If you break your leg, if you sprain your ankle, which I do all the time, unfortunately, that could be a short-term illness or injury that impacts how you move about the world. You could also acquire or develop a disability rather than something that is present at birth. You could acquire disability such as a vision or hearing disability as you get older, or some kind of long-term chronic condition such as diabetes or cerebral palsy, or there are lots of examples. And some of these disabilities can be invisible. A disability does not have to be visible or apparent to have the person be protected from discrimination. And there are many. We're going to talk about some of these disabilities that fall into this category, but it's something to keep in mind. If someone comes to you and says, "I have a disability and I need this," whether you can perceive that they have a disability or not, it's good to take their word for it. It's the right thing to do. Because we know that nationally, 1 in 5 people has an invisible disability. This could be something like neurodivergence, like ADHD or dyslexia, an autoimmune disease, where the person may feel very good one day and may need more assistance on other days. A communication disability, chronic pain, people who suffer from migraines, one day they may not need an accommodation because they're feeling good. If they have a migraine, they may need some accommodations to help deal with that. And mental health conditions and diabetes, which I believe I mentioned earlier. So, something to keep in mind. These are things that people live with all the time, whether we are aware of it or not. If people know that there are accommodations for their disability, it's our job to help honor that.
Okay, so I think it's my turn now. Thanks, Ellen. So we're going to dive into some of the disability statistics and language. And our statistics are going to focus on the city of Chicago, mainly because we published a report about neighborhood conditions for adults with disabilities in our city in partnership with the Department of Public Health. So we highly recommend that you go read that report. It was the first of its kind. But in finding this information, we learned that more than 1 in 4 adults, or just over 26%, has a disability, which matches national trends. Like Ellen mentioned, nationally, 1 in 5 people have an invisible disability, but within that same category, 1 in 4 adults in total have a disability. Within Chicago, over 42% of people who reported having a disability also said they had more than one disability. So this could be someone who maybe has a mobility disability and uses a wheelchair, but then also could potentially have dyslexia. And so having multiple disabilities is really common. And like I mentioned, over 42% have more than one. The most common disability that we found in our report was cognitive disabilities, which we will talk about later in this presentation, and then also mobility disabilities. We also learned that, unsurprisingly, disability exists in all age ranges, but adults over 65 accounted for the majority of folks who have a disability. And then the next highest category was adults 45 to 64. We were surprised to learn, though, that the category of 18 to 24-year-olds, they were reported at about 24%, which, that is a quarter of the population. And we were surprised that the number was this high, mainly for two reasons. One, we anticipated it being lower because we weren't sure if people identified as having a disability, but because the definition of disability, like Ellen mentioned, is so broad and is actually growing, more and more people are identifying as disabled. And then also younger people tend to put their identity first. And so people who are in the age ranges of 18 to 24 are starting to identify more as being disabled. So it was a surprising statistic for us. We expected it to be lower, but it is fascinating. And so we also learned that there are several neighborhoods that have the highest prevalence of disability, which means that over 40% of the adults who were reported in this report identified as having a disability. And some of those neighborhoods, from highest prevalence to lowest, and by lowest, I mean still mean 40%, was Burnside, West Garfield Park, West Inglewood, South Deering, Fuller Park, Riverdale, North Lawndale, and Roseland. We always like to highlight this map, mainly because it mirrors a lot of other maps that you see in city reports. So it's similar to maps that pertain to redlining. It's similar to maps that are about food deserts. So we try really hard within the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities to provide services on the south and west sides where there is the highest prevalence of disability. Like most of our home modifications, those take place on the south and west sides. We also do a lot of outreach on the south and west sides. Our satellite office, the Central West Community Center, is also on the west side in the Illinois Medical District. So we try really hard to make sure that our services are available in the communities that have the highest prevalence. Now, there are a couple of ways that you can talk about disability, but we recommend these two ways because they are the most inclusive and likely the safest options for you. So the main one that we recommend is person-first language, which means you would say that a person has a disability or a person with disability. This is a great first approach if you're not really sure how a person identifies. And an example would be, where is the accessible entrance for my friend who has a mobility disability? You may also, in some instances, see the letters PWD when referring to people with disabilities, and that's just the acronym for it. And then there's also the identity first approach, where someone puts their disabled identity at the forefront of who they are. So it would be disabled person. An example that we like to use is that the commissioner for MOPD, Commissioner Rachel Arfa, she likes to refer to herself as a deaf commissioner, not a commissioner who is deaf, which means that she's putting her deaf identity first. Now, this is often for people who are really proud of their disabled identity. Many people use it, but if you're not sure how someone defines their own disability, using the language person with a disability is a good first approach. I also see a note in the chat here about pregnant people also being in the category of, I'm assuming, invisible disability. I may have missed when you actually sent that, so I apologize. But the pregnancy is not necessarily considered a disability unless there is something that happens with the pregnancy. So like gestational diabetes, then that would be considered a disability. Ellen, are there, I'm kind of blanking on some of the other ones, but do you have other ideas about pregnant people?
Yes, I think that may, depending on your symptoms, which can be so different, in terms of what you're experiencing. That could be considered someone who has a temporary disability, and has recovered from it. Sometimes people need extra mobility assistance. They may need to take frequent breaks. They may need access to a restroom, access to seated accommodations. Those are some examples.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. I also see in the chat here, do we serve the south suburbs or recommend other resources? So our resources are for the city of Chicago because we are a city of Chicago entity. But that's not to say we don't have connections to other Chicagoland areas. So we will have our contact information on the last slide. And if there are things in particular, or there are certain neighborhoods that you are asking for resources for, we can try our best to connect you with the right people. But in terms of what we do provide services for city residents. And then thanks so much for offering your assistance with photography and stuff. I appreciate that. Okay, so continuing talking about disability. So as you've seen, we use the words disability and disabled. Part of that is because we are really proud of our community and we want to recognize that disability and disabled are not bad words. We tell people to avoid using phrases such as challenged, differently abled, and special needs. A lot of that is outdated language and may have been appropriate at the time, but language is always changing. And we are at the point right now that we want to say disabled and disability. And I do like to note on this slide that there are instances where some schools, even Chicago public schools, will still call their special education departments special education. And that is for legal purposes. So the IDEA, which is the Students with Disabilities Education Act that protects all students with disabilities, they specifically refer to students with disabilities as special education. And so from a legal perspective, that's one of the reasons why they still use that language. But in the actual Chicago Public Schools district, for example, they changed their disability office to be the Office of Students with Disabilities. So there are some instances where things could potentially be interchangeable, but we do encourage, outside of the education realm, to use disability and disabled. And avoiding these terms does add to the stigma of disability. And our office, as Ellen said, is trying to make Chicago the most inclusive and accessible city in the world, which means we want to get rid of that stigma by using words disability and disabled. Now, as business folks on this call, one thing that we'd really like to highlight is using the word accessible instead of handicap. Handicap is a derogatory term and our community does not use it at all. Translated, it literally means less than. So when you are referring to accessible parking spaces or accessible bathrooms, we encourage you to use those words. I have seen, as a constituent of the city of Chicago, a lot of places that still have signs that say handicap parking. If you are a business owner and you have a sign such as that or handicap bathroom, it is highly recommended that you change the signage to say accessible. Accessible is a way of communicating that something is available to use by a person with a disability. It is also telling people that it is accessible to everybody. And on this next slide here, I'll just go ahead and go there. Accessibility refers to the design of products, devices, services, and environments that are available and usable by everyone. So one of the things that we like to talk about is wheelchair ramps. Of course, they were designed for wheelchair users, but people who have strollers use them. If you have a suitcase that maybe is heavy and you can't lift it, you're likely going to use a ramp. Also, the automatic door openers, those were designed for people with disabilities, but people use them all the time. And so accessibility is not just for people with disabilities. And that's why we encourage you to use the word accessible instead. And there are 3 types of accessibility. There's physical, communication, and digital. And physical refers to the way we interact with our built environment, like the examples I just gave. Communication refers to how information is shared and received. So that could be by voice, it could be using American Sign Language. And then digital is also how we interact in our digital spaces. which is like this one here. So that's why we have like closed captionings. We also have the chat available. That's also partially why I want to make sure we're reading out what comes in the chat. That way, for folks who maybe can't access the chat, are still participating in the conversation. We also, there's a note here too in the chat that says, encourage businesses to not put the baby changing table in the accessible bathroom stall. Yeah, so that can be an issue for sure, especially if it's a smaller restroom. The accessible stalls need to have enough space for wheelchair users to be able to turn around and use the restroom. And so those baby changing tables can sometimes impede the space. So that's a good note. Thank you so much for flagging that. Now we do have one more video to show you. This is one of our favorites. We love it so much. It is from the DC Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. So you may be able to see some of the Capitol buildings in the background, but we're introducing you to Awkward Bob. And it's a short video that represents the different ways people interact with people with disabilities. It is meant to be funny, and we will sort of talk about some takeaways at the end. So if you're willing, you're welcome to put your thoughts in the chat. We'll also, I think that because this is a webinar, that's the most accessible form. So if you can put your thoughts in the chat, that would be great. But Awkward Bob is simply the best, and we're going to go ahead and learn from him now. Ooh.
Good morning, Bob.
Morning there, big man. Morning, Alice!
There's no need to be awkward. Poor Bob. Like so many of us, he just doesn't know how to interact with people with disabilities.
It's pretty easy, really. People with disabilities are people first.
We need the same things that every person needs, like respect.
Good morning, everyone.
Attention!
Okay. Maybe we need to be more specific.
The easiest way to show respect is to focus on the person, not the disability. It's okay. You'll get the hang of it.
One easy way to focus on the person is to watch the person signing and not their interpreter.
Or their companion.
It's really cool that you'd like to help, but do us both a favor and please ask me first. What you think might be helping?
I got you.
Wait, ah! Oh no, might actually not.
If you'd like to offer me help, let me hold on to your elbow. Don't take mine.
Hey, would you like to take my arm?
Sure.
Assistive devices help us to live our lives. They're really important and really personal.
Grabbing them only makes it weird for everyone.
What? Please only touch our devices and service animals if we've given you permission. And don't take it personally if I ask you not to. Remember that my service animal helps me all the time. Neither of us would like it if we were separated.
Remember, we make our own decisions. We sign documents, vote, volunteer, work, and pay taxes.
We get married.
So don't underestimate me just because I have a great smile.
Just because I'm blind
May I help you?
does not mean I'm deaf.
I don't know. I think he said he was going to come, but... Just because I'm deaf doesn't mean I'm blind.
And just because I use a wheelchair doesn't mean that I can't sweep you off your feet.
So take a deep breath. Relax. We don't bite.
Unless we're really hungry.
Hello there, ladies. How are you?
Hello. And if you're not sure what to do, just ask.
Hi, would you still like to see a menu?
No thanks, but can you please read it to me?
Sure, definitely.
Just treat us the way you would want to be treated, and we'll all be okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Alice.
Ready.
Awkward no more. Nice job, Bob. Go forth and be human.
There's no need to be awkward.
Okay. I've seen it so many times and it still makes me chuckle. Um, so questions for you all. You're welcome to put your thoughts in the chat and I can read them out loud, but what did you learn? What surprised you? Do you have any outstanding questions? And I'll just pause for a little while here to see if things come through. Okay, nothing yet, but that's all right. You're welcome to keep sending things in the chat, but for the purposes of time, we'll go ahead and give you a couple of our takeaways. So we want to make sure that you know that not everyone with a disability will require assistance. Oh, there's some things coming through. Okay. We have in high school, I used to volunteer to go on field trips with a classroom for disabled students. This is where I learned they all just want to be treated like regular people and not shown special attention. Yes, treat all the same. Yep, exactly. Not looking at the interpreter. They are talking, so I should look at the person who can't hear. Right. So one thing I like to note about working with ASL interpreters is they are also people. So it's okay if you do look at them, like you don't have to try really hard to ignore to ignore them. But when you are in communication with a person who is deaf or hard of hearing, it's best practice to look at them while they are communicating with you. But again, it's a-okay if you accidentally look or acknowledge the interpreter because they are a person. Sorry, I'm typing with one hand today. That's okay, no worries. So never assume that a person with a disability requires assistance. Also, make sure you don't touch anyone, just in general, unless they specifically ask you to assist them. One thing that I've heard before and have witnessed before are people who are wheelchair users just being pushed out of the way, or out of the way to whomever someone thinks that they're in the way. But mobility devices are seen as an extension of a person with disabilities, like person. So when you are moving them in their wheelchair, you're moving them, right? So just make sure that you're not touching someone unless they ask for assistance, and then allowing the person to tell you what they need and how you can best help them. So one thing that we like to suggest is saying, asking, do you need help? And then if they say yes, you say, how can I help you? Because as we saw with the video, the person was putting their weight on the door. Someone thought that they were being helpful by opening the door, but then she fell. And so it's okay to ask if someone needs help. They might say no, that's awesome. You move on with your day. But if they say yes, just make sure you ask how to help them. Okay, and I believe I turn it back to Ellen now.
Hi, this is Ellen. I wanted to go back to somebody asked in the chat about where changing tables ought to go. I think our accessibility compliance unit may have more specific thoughts about this. I think in general, it's better to have more accessible restrooms and also more changing tables for parents. As a parent myself, I do wish that they would put more changing tables or changing spaces in men's restrooms as well as women's restrooms. Some places also have a single stall or a single room restroom that could be accessible and also be for families or somebody who may need a little extra space or extra time. Just having more options for people is better because everybody's different. And at the same time, a restroom is a need for all of us. Let me read a couple more comments in here. Bridget says the awkward video was good to view and educational. I'm glad you liked it. This is from DC, so they're doing great work there. I learned preferred addressing when speaking about a person with a disability. And we're talking about people parking in an accessible parking space and people asking questions. Yeah, in general, it is very frustrating to to have people question whether you have a disability based on what they can see or experience about you. There are offices in the city that handle accessible parking enforcement, so we don't have to do it. And it's better if you see someone parking there, just let it be. Ashley says, I'm a huge advocate for equity and inclusion. I have a daughter and several family members with disabilities, and I work hard to make sure they always feel included. That's great. She also says, nursing areas are just destigmatizing feeding in public, especially when using a cover up. Absolutely. Why don't we go ahead now and talk a little bit about some disability categories and some best practices by category. We're going to talk about four main disability categories that we usually recognize. They are physical or mobility, sensory, emotional or behavioral, and intellectual or developmental. And a physical or mobility disability is a condition that impacts a person's physical functioning, mobility, ability to use their hands, arms, legs, or feet, or endurance. This could be a limb difference, a heart condition, multiple sclerosis, spina bifida, or arthritis are some examples. And here on screen, we have some examples of walkers, canes, crutches, or a wheelchair, all devices that people might use, to make the world more accessible with their disability. And best practices, as we saw in Awkward Bob, don't touch a person or their mobility device unless given permission. It's part of their personal space. We wouldn't like it if somebody touched us or shoved us. So, treat people as an extension, with their devices, treat their devices as an extension of them. If you're going to be talking with somebody, in a wheelchair, it's great to get down to their eye level and talk directly with them. If they're using an interpreter or someone else to help them communicate, you can still talk directly with the person with the disability and not their companion. If you are hosting an event or planning to, make signage or other things for your business, know where your accessible entrances, bathrooms, and parking spaces are so you can direct someone. You could even put that information on your website and say, if you need an accessible door, enter through this side of the business, for example. If you're holding an event, it's great to be able to widen spaces by moving furniture around so that people who are using a wheelchair or another, larger mobility device can get around. Let's talk about sensory disabilities. These are conditions that impact a person's sensory functioning, including sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, or spatial awareness. One interesting thing about the time that we're in is that I don't think a lot of us would have considered loss of taste or smell in terms of disabilities until COVID happened, and a lot of people experience temporary or even semi-permanent loss of taste or smell, which is something that definitely requires some adaptation in your life, because it is one of the senses that we use. Some other examples are deafness or hearing loss, blindness or low vision, color blindness, or macular degeneration. Best practices for working with folks who are deaf or hard of hearing. Follow the person's lead. If they are comfortable with one kind of communication, you can follow that and feel comfortable doing that. If you would like to use your notes app or a transcription app to communicate with them, you could hand your phones back and forth. You could each type on your own phone and show it to each other. This is one thing we do in the office sometimes casually if we're having issues communicating. If the person reads lips, make sure you provide eye contact with them and try not to cover your mouth or face. Again, during COVID, this did prove an issue for some folks who needed to lip read with the popularity of masking in different situations. We actually have some masks in the office that have a clear window, so it goes over your mouth so that you can keep yourself protected from a public health standpoint while also letting your people see your lips in order to read them. That said, not everybody who is deaf is good at lip reading, and not everybody who isn't deaf either, I should say. And also, lip reading is not always complete. It doesn't always let people understand everything of what you're saying. There could be a miscommunication. So that's one good option, but not necessarily the only or the default option. In terms of sign language, it's great to learn some common signs, like using the ABCs or welcome or thank you. If people bring in an ASL interpreter, that's great. Make sure that you're speaking at a typical speed or perhaps a little bit more slowly. And one thing I notice is that ASL interpreters often take more time to translate a sentence than someone might do while speaking it. So if you see that the ASL interpreter is still signing while you are finished talking, just give them a minute to complete their thought, and then you can go on. In terms of folks who use hearing aids or cochlear implants, again, like this is a personal preference for folks who are deaf of hard of hearing. Some find them to be absolutely life-changing and critical for their understanding of the world. And other people prefer not to do that. But that's okay. Everybody has their own preference. But one thing that can help anybody who has hearing loss or uses a hearing aid is to move to a quieter space. And if you work at a place that's like a performance space and you have available assistive listening devices, just knowing how to understand and operate those and making sure that people know where they can ask for them. For example, at a box office or, at a welcome table for a ticketed event. ASL interpreter tips, we did talk a little bit about this, but make eye contact with the deaf person. I think as Liliana said, this language is a little bit stern. You may also make eye contact with the ASL interpreter, of course, but make sure that you're primarily speaking to the deaf person directly. And speaking to them, directly means not saying, tell that person that, but saying, hey, I'd like to welcome you to my business. I'd love to help you out while you're here. And knowing that they will be able to check what the interpreter is doing to stay alert as to what's going on. For presentations or events where ASL interpretation is divided, best practice is to reserve seating for attendees and their guests where they have a line of sight view of the interpreter and speaker. This makes perfect sense. If you can't see the person signing, you're not going to get much out of their interpretation. It's also best practice to provide the interpreter with materials ahead of time so they can practice any signs. If there are names that they're going to be hand spelling out, that they know those are coming and that they're prepared. Or if there's any kind of specialized words or information that they may want to practice.
All right, so best practices for people who are blind or who have low vision. It helps when you identify yourself, including your role and your name, so they can start to identify your voice. So an example that I like to give is I started working with the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities back in February, and we have a colleague that works in our satellite office at our Central West location. And when I was starting to meet her and work with her regularly, I would say, this is Liliana, I'm the new program manager. It's good to be in this space with you again, or how are you? And then every time thereafter, I'd be like, hey, this is Liliana, the new program manager. And since I don't see her regularly, I will still say, like, this is Liliana speaking. And that's just a way for them to know who you are. And if they have questions, if you work for the business, you'd be able to help them. We also suggest offering wayfinding. So this means that the person who's blind or low vision holds onto your elbow and you provide verbal directions while you navigate. So the video that we showed with Awkward Bob, the wayfinding was turned into a joke about being like a dance, which is great. But wayfinding is helpful in spaces maybe where there are narrow walkways, like in an antique store or something like that. And then you just let them know, like in 10 feet, we're going to turn right, and then there'll be some stairs and we'll walk down those stairs. So that is an option for folks who are blind or have low vision. And then also having accessible written materials. So providing things in alternative formats. We do like to suggest if it's on a website, using Word or putting something directly on the website rather than using a PDF. PDFs are the most inaccessible document. There are ways to make it accessible, but the remediation of PDFs takes a long time and is also a little bit more difficult to do. So we suggest using Word or putting information directly on a website. We also suggest having things in accessible print, meaning size 18 to 24 font, using sans serif fonts and high contrast colors. So the sans serif fonts are things like the ones you're seeing right now. This is the body of the PowerPoint is Aptos, and I believe it's a size 24, maybe a 26. And then high contrast is like, again, what you're seeing here. So it's a white background with black text. That is considered high contrast. There are a lot of resources available, free resources available out there that will test your color contrast. So if you want to have like a light yellow background, you can test out what font color would be the most accessible on that thing that you're creating. And then providing assistance with documents or reading things aloud as needed. Again, as the Awkward Bob video showed, they were at a restaurant and the person who was seated asked for the menu to be read to them. So that is also an option for providing access for people who are blind or low vision. And now we do have a note here on service animals. So service animals, they are defined as dogs or miniature horses that are individually trained to do work or perform tasks for people with disabilities. We mainly like to include the miniature horses because it's a fun fact. We don't really have them here in Chicago. We recently learned that they are in Arizona though. So if you're ever in Arizona, look out for a miniature horse service animal. But for our purposes, we will be talking about dogs here. They are allowed to accompany their handlers or the people who have the service animal. In all areas of a facility where the public is permitted, there are no vests or other identification requirements for service animals. And one thing we like to note here is that, as it says, it's where the public is permitted. So if, like at a department store, for example, there are storage areas in the back, a person with a service animal cannot go in there just because they have a service animal because the public is not allowed back there. However, in other instances, service animals are allowed to go wherever the public is allowed to go. You are only allowed to ask 2 questions in the event you're unsure if an animal is a service animal. You can ask, is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? And what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? You are not allowed to ask any other questions. You're not allowed to ask like what their disability is. You can't ask that the animal perform the task. You are only allowed to ask these 2 questions. Most commonly, service animals you will likely see guide dogs. And so there are often guide dog harnesses. So if you see a guide dog but you're maybe still not sure if it is a service animal, you can ask, is the dog required because of a disability? The person will say yes. And then you say, what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? And their answer will be to guide. And that's it. That's all the information you need. Service animals, they can be any breed of dog, any size of dog. Sometimes they may not even perform their task while they're in the business or wherever they may be. So like an example is some service animals will alert their handler to low blood sugar if they have diabetes, or they may alert them if they have seizures to let them know that they may experience a seizure soon. They also can provide deep pressure therapy for people who have post-traumatic stress disorder. So they're remarkable animals and can do so many things. So you may not see the animal perform the task while they're in your space, but that doesn't mean that they're not a service animal. They do need to be under the handler's control at all times. So you may request that the person leave with the service animal, but you can welcome them back without it. So at no point access to the space should be denied to the individual. The individual can always come back. And I like to note that what we mean by under control is that there are no indoor bathroom incidences. There are no, the animal is not lunging at other people or other animals. Some animals do bark as part of their task, like they may alert someone to something, but it shouldn't be incessant barking. It might just be like 1 or 2 little yips and then it's done. So if you see someone who says that they have a service animal, but then they like take their animal off the leash and are playing fetch with them or something like that, you are allowed to ask them to leave, but that they can come back without the animal. And then the best slide of the entire presentation is next. It is our service animals. So we have 2 service animals at the mayor's office. Ruby is our commissioner's service animal. She is an Irish golden retriever. And then Jade is our deputy commissioner's service animal, and she is a black lab. And they're both the sweetest. It's the best slide. And then one note on the difference between service animals and emotional support animals. So emotional support animals are covered under the Fair Housing Act, but they are not covered under the ADA. Like I mentioned, service animals are trained, they are allowed in public spaces, and they do not require documentation. Emotional support animals are not required to be trained. They are often there to provide comfort and affection. They are not allowed in most public spaces. And I say most because some places do allow dogs, but some places do not. And if that is the case, then emotional support animals are not allowed. And you are required to provide documentation from a doctor or therapist for your emotional support animal. I did see a question about service animals in the chat. So how can we ask to handle the service dog? I work in the nail salon and have clients coming with dogs that run all around, and I'm a person who's afraid of dogs. So if your business allows dogs, regardless of if they're service animals or not, that may be a policy to consider if you are a manager or if you're an employee to talk to someone about that. But if it is a service animal, it should basically be as if the animal is not there. So Jade, for example, she will ride in Ubers and people will be like, oh, I don't know about dogs, dogs bark, but she is silent and she falls asleep in the car. So service animals, if they are under their handler's control, you basically shouldn't notice them. They should be on their duty. They're like working with their person. Of course, when they're not working, they are just regular dogs. But if they are in a business and they are a service animal, they should be under the handler's control, which means they should not be running around. If that person, for example, is in the nail salon and their dog is running around and they said it was a service animal, you can ask them to leave. And they are welcome to return without the animal. So it does need to be under their control. But again, you can only ask those 2 questions to learn whether or not it is a service animal. Are there any resources that provide funding or free tool? I'll be offering training soon. What are some accessibility tools I can find? Are there any resources that provide funding or free tools? Yes, there are tons. Again, we have our contact information on the last slide, so feel free to reach out to us and we can provide more information. Okay, working our way through here. So emotional or behavioral disabilities. So these are conditions that significantly impact someone's ability to regulate, control, interpret, and express their emotions. So nearly 1 in 7 people globally live with an emotional or behavioral disability, and anxiety and depression are the most common. So some examples are PTSD, bipolar disorder, eating disorders. And one thing I like to note too is that emotional disabilities are more internal. So that's anxiety, depression, and behavioral disabilities are more external, which may be like aggression. And then we'll have some best practices too, and a slide after this one. We kind of lump these 2 together. So intellectual or developmental disabilities are conditions that impact a person's physical, learning, language, or behavioral development. Intellectual disabilities are often characterized by limitations in mental abilities like problem solving, and developmental disabilities are a broader category that include physical disability like cerebral palsy. Developmental disabilities also occur when someone is in the developmental stages, so from birth to age 25. Autism spectrum disorder, for example, is considered a developmental disability because it shows up between the ages of 0 and 25. There's also ADHD, Down syndrome, and Tourette's. So for best practices when working with people who have developmental, intellectual, emotional, or behavioral disabilities would be to communicate clearly. So speak and write in plain language by using simple words, active voice, and short sentences. We also suggest practice active, non-judgmental listening and being patient and calm, so trying to validate experiences. And then one of the main ones too is pausing between information to allow time to process as needed. So some folks may receive information, like if you're giving them directions, they may take a minute to process what you're saying before they respond. So just giving them that space. And then similar to folks who use hearing aids or cochlear implants is being mindful of sensory input, such as light, noise, crowds, and spaces. Okay, so now some key takeaways. Be open-minded. Disability can vary in definition and visibility. We also highly recommend that you prioritize access because accessibility is for everyone and not just people with disabilities. Allow others to lead. People with disabilities will tell you if and when they need help. And consider your language. Remember to use person with a disability or disabled person, and also to use accessibility, such as accessible spaces or accessible restrooms. And like I mentioned, we do have a little contact slide here. So you can reach our office by phone. You can also email us at access@cityofchicago.org. We also have our website, which is just chicago.gov/disabilities. And then we're on all of our socials. And it is on a hiatus right now, but we do have a podcast called All Access. You can find it where you listen to podcasts, but on YouTube, we also have ASL interpretation available, and it's burned into the video itself. So I think we are going to have opportunities for Q&A. But if you all are interested, I'm also going to put in the chat a link to our feedback form. So if you have a mobile device, you can scan the QR code that's on the screen. But if you do not have a mobile device, or if using it on a computer would be more accessible, I just put the link in the chat. And this is not like a link to Yelp or Google. It's generally just a form that only Ellen and I really monitor. And that's just to let us know exactly what you think. If there's more information that you'd like, if there are areas where you think we could expand, we want to know. And so I'll also go ahead and put our email in the chat too. So access@city.of-chicago.org. And Ellen is one of the people who manages that email. So she can always connect you directly to me, or she can answer you from that email if you do have questions. But I'm going to go ahead and stop my share here to see if other folks have any questions. Actually, you know what? I'll leave it up just in case for the QR code. Never mind, scratch that.
Sounds great. Thank you both so much for a great presentation. If there is any questions, if you could please put them in the chat. They're requesting, would they get a copy of this presentation?
We can definitely share a copy with you. Can I send it to you and then you can share it out to folks?
Yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll definitely be able to send it out.
Okay, cool.
And remember, this is being recorded and will be at youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. And I will put that in the chat one more time.
Okay, I did see a note here in the chat about the proper way to ask for accommodations if a service animal is around, like on a plane. I'm allergic to dogs. This is an issue I run into. Yes, so I am an allergy haver as well. And being in an office with 2 service animals, it was quite a transition. Quite a transition. So for me, what I was able to do is I put in a reasonable accommodation request to the city's HR department, and I now have an air purifier in my office. I also know, like not to touch my face after petting them, like, your own allergies. But service animals are required for people to access services. So it's important that we try our best to make that accommodation. And it's not putting one accommodation above the other. It's more so trying to learn ways in which we can work together. So for people who have allergies, I know that it can be difficult because I am one of those people. But if you are a business owner in particular, and someone comes in with a service animal, you have to let them in. You cannot deny them because of your allergies, because I'm sure people will come in with their own pet dander or whatever too. So it's just important that you are being mindful of the law. The law is that service animals are allowed. But again, if you're not a business owner and you're perhaps an employee, you can request something to support you. So like I got the air purifier. Maybe you need, if there is a service animal that enters the space, maybe you need a break to be able to like get away from them. These are all possibilities. So yeah, are there any other questions that I may have missed? Ellen, did you see any in the chat?
I don't see any other ones in the chat. I see some people recommending the BACP YouTube channel, which is helpful. I will also put a link to the MOPD YouTube channel in the chat.
Oh, that would be great. Thank
We
you.
have our podcast on there.
Oh, great.
And other resources like that. We have a couple training videos as well. We also have some information about our disability report that we put out with the Department of Public Health earlier this year. If you're interested in learning more about disability in Chicago, how folks with disabilities feel, where they live, it might be something interesting that you'd like to check out. So feel free to enjoy that, bookmark it for later, what have you.
I'm just looking to see if there's any more comments. There is a comment in the Q&A regarding businesses that place toilet paper dispensers and the placement. Is there any best practices on that?
That is such a good question. I don't think we have any specific guidance on that, I would encourage you to email the Access website and see maybe they can connect you to somebody in our accessibility compliance department, and they may have some thoughts.
That'd be great. Thank you. I will give everyone one more minute. We're getting a lot of thank yous. This has been so helpful. Thank you. All right. It looks like that is all the questions and comments. I want to thank both of our speakers. Oh, one more got it in right before.
I just went ahead and answered the person who sent their Q&A, I think. So.
Okay. And how
here's
right at the card. How does the city help dyslexic people?
I think I might need more information on that. So in terms of the things that we provide, we try our best to make sure that we're using accessible fonts. It is legally required that we use accessible fonts, especially with some new digital accessibility guidelines. I know that there are certain fonts to use for people who are dyslexic, but I'm trying to think of other citywide accommodations. Ellen, does anything come to mind for you?
If you are having trouble reading some information that the city provides, we may be able to print you out a large print version, or, if it's not too long, maybe even read it to you. That also goes for our forms if you're signing up for an event with us, or, signing up to receive more information. If you can't fill out that form, you can call our office and we can walk you through it. As far as I'm trying to think of other specifics, but you could also reach out to our information and referrals unit at our office, and they could recommend you some other local resources depending on, your particular symptoms and needs.
Great. One more question came in. Do you offer resources to find speech pathologists or speech assistants for children?
I think that kind of goes into what you were just talking about, Ellen. The Disability Resource Unit may be able to provide, connect people to resources. Do you know that email address off the top of your head by chance?
I think through access@cityofchicago.org. That's probably the best way to go.
Cool. I'll put it again in the chat.
Wonderful. Well, it looks like that's all. Thank you. Oh, thank you for putting that in the chat again. That's great. All right. Thank you, speakers. We truly, truly, truly appreciate all this great information. Thank you, all attendees. We appreciate you coming on this Friday. I'm not sure summer, raining, or what, but hoping everyone has a great weekend. And thank you all for coming. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.